So thanks everyone for joining us for this second lecture by Professor Frantz Grenet titled The Elite Cultures of Bactria, Sogdiana and Gandhara under a quick succession of masters. Frantz Grenet currently holds a chair at the Collège de France in the history and cultures of pre-Islamic Central Asia. He obtained his degrees from the École Normale Supérieure. He was deputy director of DAFA, the Délégation archéologique française en Afghanistan from 1977 to 1981. He joined the CNRS in Paris in 1981 and became director of research there in 2005, a post he held until 2013. Prior to his current appointment, he was also professor at the École pratique des hautes études at the Sorbonne since 1999, where he was chair of religions of the ancient Iranian world. Professor Grenet has extensive fieldwork experience in Afghanistan in the 70s and early 80s, and since 1989 as the director of the French-Uzbek archaeological mission in Sogdiana, Mahfuz, excavating at Samarkand and also other sites in Uzbekistan. Among his many accolades, he just told us yesterday, he's most proud of having been made honorary citizen of Samarkand. His main fields of research and interests are the history and archaeology of Central Asia, and as I mentioned yesterday, he has published extensively on the Sogdians, Hellenized Bactria, Zoroastrianism, to name a few topics. 7 edited and co-edited volumes, over 200 articles, and next year we'll be publishing the volume Early Sogdian Inscriptions and Documents with Nicholas Sims Williams, and the first extensive volume of the Samarkand excavations will also appear not too long from now. So please help me welcome Frantz Grenet once again.
So my second lecture is about the elite cultures of Bactria and Sogdiana under a quick succession of masters, the example of prestige metalware. A few words of introduction. Now, in the absence of royal inscriptions found outside Mongolia, the successive political messages of the new rulers of Central Asia in this period are known almost only from their seals and coins. The Kidarites were the last rulers who called themselves Kushānshāh. Well, basically, it was their realm. While the Hephtalites abandoned this title and, as mentioned yesterday, exhibited on their coins a frightening physical type in complete opposition to the classical or Sasanian canons. The Turks introduced new fashions, especially in their hairstyle. Hephtalites and Turks are sometimes portrayed together with their wife, which was an innovation. Notwithstanding such marked self-identities, some silver vessels, probably the highest medium of political propaganda in Central Asia as well as in Sasanian Iran, show a deliberate ethnic diversity of aristocratic figures. And contrary to the Sasanians, the Hunnic king was never depicted alone, but always as a member of a group. A cultural phenomenon which hitherto has not received a satisfactory explanation is a remarkable revival of Hellenic literary subject on the series of Bactrian silver bowls, produced from the 4th to the 7th centuries. In one case, the public for this bowl can be identified as Hellenized Jews living in the Hephthalite Empire. But in general, these objects were commissioned by local aristocrats. The precious metalware is one of the The precious metalware is one of the most representative productions of the Sasanian royal workshops. Characterized by the technique of the crimped reliefs, the Sasanian art of gold and silverware strongly influenced all the peri-Sasanian production in Central Asia. Admittedly, the Bactrian and later on the Sogdian vessels are more diverse in shapes and decorations than the Sasanian ones. Besides some silver plates with a decoration on the inside, such as this one, typical of Sasanian royal workshops, the Central Asiatic repertoire of precious ware comprises various vases, jugs, and cups, with or without feet, including the so-called Bactrian bowls. The term Bactrian bowl was introduced in the scholarly literature in 1943 by Kurt Weizmann in a seminal article. Even if these bowls are often deprived of an archaeological context, and in any case were never found in their original context of use, these pieces of silverware have been correctly located and dated in 1986 by Boris Marshak as being executed from the 4th to the 6th century, occasionally to the 7th century, in Bactria and in neighboring regions which shared the same political masters, Sogdiana, Gandhara. Therefore, most of these bowls postdate the Sasanian long period of withdrawal from the eastern territories of Iran after the 4th century. They were executed mainly under the rule of the Kidarite and Hephthalite Huns. The technique remains Sasanian, with additional pieces cast separately and crimped into the shell and with partial gilding. 20 specimens or so are now known, the corpus having greatly expanded after the publication of the catalogue of the Al-Sabah collection in Kuwait, under the direction of Martha Carter, with important contributions by Prudence Harper. Morphologically, the Bactrian bowls continue the tradition of the so-called Megarian bowls and Aretine ware, which survive now only in ceramic specimens, but it is sure that there were metal specimens originally. These bowls belong to Hellenistic and Roman times. The Bactrian bowls are small, like their models, like their Western models. The Bactrian bowls are small drinking bowls, about 15 to 20 centimeters wide and 6 centimeters high, without a ring foot, and decorated on the outside, as they were made to be filled with wine and circulating among the guests, which was not the case of the Sasanian large dishes, which were decorated inside and so were not functional as vessels. This type of bowls was no doubt the object known in Sogdian as patgrave, Persian piole, cup. Some of them carry inscriptions in Bactrian or Sogdian, but none identifies the subject, and very few of these inscriptions are from the original owner. The images, most often human figures, are all unique. Never do two bowls repeat each other, nor are clearly the product of the same workshop. The imagery combines to varying degrees unique features typical of the owners and give it good chronological landmarks, Sasanian symbols of charisma, and iconographic and literary motifs inherited or imported from the West during the Hellenic colonization, as well as through later commercial contacts with the Roman Empire. As mentioned, Boris Marshak's contribution in 1986 marked a great progress as he established the general chronology now accepted. At this time, however, Marshak had access only to 10 specimens, half of what is known now. Also, he chose not to question Weizmann's interpretations of the classical subjects, questionable as they already appeared. In a series of articles recently published or forthcoming, Anka Dan and I have argued that the bowls carrying such subjects are not decorated with eclectic selections from tragedies of Euripides, as Weizmann believed, but most often show consistent stories of Greek mythological characters, sometimes from tragedies, sometimes more or less directly from Homer. In one case, from the Alexander romance. But these stories are always adapted to the tastes of an Eastern Iranian audience. Other bowls show different kinds of subjects, some of them typical of the local aristocratic culture, some associating it with a Dionysiac atmosphere. I shall begin this presentation with such themes before moving to the classical repertoire. Two Bactrian bowls executed during the Hephthalite period stage the ethnic diversity of the ruling elites, as well as the collective character of the political power, in marked contrast with the Sasanian repertoire, where the king is always alone, or at least ruling alone. A bowl purchased in Swat in the 19th century and now in the British Museum shows hunting scenes which are very different from the Sasanian royal hunts. It might well have been produced in the region where it was acquired. Rulers who coexisted in the same region are, so to say, portrayed in hunting terms. The hunted animals are local. Boar, mountain ram, boar somewhere, a boar, tiger, and also lions, but lions at that time were probably still found in Punjab. Figure 4, this one. A bareheaded with curly hair is probably the local ruler. There is an analogy, but it's very small seal here. Probably he is the commissioner of the object because he is also shown in the central medallion. By showing himself hunting with 4 other rulers of superior standing, he intends to demonstrate that he is well connected. Figures 1 and 2. Figures 1 and 2 are 2 Kidarite rulers of Gandhara, wearing crowns respectively with wings and horns. Which appear on Kidarite issues from the mid-5th century and are themselves derived from Sasanian crowns. Figure 3 is a Hephthalite ruler, or perhaps a ruler of the so-called Alkhan Huns, whom some numismatists believe were originally different from the Hephtalites. In this case, the ethnic marker is the artificially deformed skull. These rulers wear no crown, nor even the ribbons which appear on coin issues. So he's probably a sub-ruler. Another bowl, now in the Al-Sabah collection, dates probably from 1 century later, at the time when the Hephtalites were going to be replaced by the Western Turks. It shows a greater diversity of figures, not only ethnic, but also social and religious. I follow Prudence Harper's excellent commentary in the Al-Sabah catalogue. 6 characters, all different, are standing by pairs under arcades in a fantasy architecture. One finds also on some other Bactrian bowls Sogdian ossuaries and non-royal Sasanian vessels. The first pair include on the left hand a character dressed as a Sasanian, but non-royal. He has no crown. He's the only one who does not carry a gift. He's holding the hilt of his sword. So he might be the host. He might be the commissioner of the vase. He salutes a man who is seemingly a Turk with his long plaits. This kind of hairdo was already described as Hunnic fashion by Procopius, slightly before the emergence of the Turks. The second pair has, on the left hand, a character who presents the characteristics of a merchant. He is fat-bellied, with a purse instead of a sword. He faces an aristocrat who wears a typical Bactrian or Sogdian kaftan. The third pair has to the left a turbaned ruler whose profile is similar to that of some late Hephthalite rulers. He could be a Hephthalite. You see the three typical, the earring with three pearls. He could be a Hephthalite, or a vassal king of Kabul, or a local ruler of the Hephthalite period in northwest India. He faces an unarmed, barefoot Indian clothed in a dhoti, holding a flower and a vase. Prudence Harper identifies him as a Brahmin. So this deliberately eclectic selection of character seems to point to a zone where Sasanian officials, Central Asian aristocrats, Indians, and merchants could be met together. The situation could well refer to the time in about 560, when the Hephthalite central possessions had just been shared between Sasanians and Turks. A more constant category, a more frequently represented category of the repertoire in Central Asia, but already in the Sasanian, middleware, is a Dionysiac repertoire, already well attested in the Greco-Bactrian period. The main reason for this choice was, of course, its direct relevance to the function of the vases. But some reasons more linked to the high culture can sometimes be supposed. Such is certainly the case with another Al-Sabah bowl, published by Prudence Harper in the catalogue. At least the Roman models were most probably linked with the initiatory Dionysiac rituals practiced in some Roman cities in Asia Minor. The central medallion shows a drunk Silenus. He is here, the goat skin is lying on, and here he's drinking from the right hand, wood face. And he's drunk and fat, typical Silenus. And nude, but on this repertoire, the genitalia are seldom exposed. It's they were. Usually they were quite prude with that. All around, 4 pairs of encrusted medallion, here is one pair, have a juvenile Dionysus on the left, facing a helmeted warrior. Alternately, these warriors are alternately young and middle-aged. The profile of Dionysus, repeated 4 times, is reminiscent of that of Alexander, as depicted in this period on Roman amulet medallions. 3 of the warriors have a mask of Silenus put on the nape cover of the helmet. It looks, Sanjyot, it looks very much like the ceramic wine jars of the Dutch ceramic wine jars of the 17th century, found in shipwrecks in Australia. It's exactly the same kind of thing. You see, some analogies with Roman gems where Athena wears the same type of helmet with a Silenus on the nape cover. So definitely, these gentlemen are associated with the figure of Silenus depicted in the central medallion. Quite often in on these bowls, the central medallion is the key to the understanding of the whole iconography. The features of these gentlemen are neither Greek, nor Sasanian, nor Hephtalites, but their hairdo, with a thick mass of curly hair at the back, is reminiscent of some aristocratic portraits of the Kidarite period. Also, the palm motif on the helmet. So we tend to attribute it to the same period. In the analysis I am publishing together with Ankadan, we adduce the testimony of a passage by Apuleius, the Golden Ass, telling how the initiate comes face to face with the god, not necessarily the Dionysiac initiate. It's a general description of Roman initiatic rituals. So listen and believe in what is true. I reached the frontier of death, and treading Proserpine's threshold, yet passed through all the elements and returned. I have seen the sun at midnight, shining brightly. I have entered and faced the gods from below, and the presence of the gods from above, and I have paid due reference, being very close to them. I have told you things that, even if you have heard, you must ignore. So this is the initiatory context, is the only context where a Roman worshipper actually sees his god face to face. Normally, it never happens. Consequently, we propose to interpret the scene as a reminiscence of Roman Dionysiac banquets in which the notabilities of such and such city took part. Rather than an echo of actual Dionysiac initiatory practices still celebrated in Bactria, which is after all possible, this could be a kind of smart transposition to the social habits of the Huns of Central Asia. Among them, young and middle-aged aristocrats were banqueting together according to the testimony of Procopius. The wealthy men attached to themselves friends to the number of 20 or more, as the case may be, and these become forever their banquet companions and have a share in all their goods, enjoying some kind of a common right in this matter. Then, when the man who has gathered such a company together comes to die, it is the custom that all these men accompany him in his tomb. Alexander, in the guise of Dionysus, is present on these medallions. The Kidarites, then the Hephtalites, were all the more encouraged to revive the memory of Alexander and his identification with Dionysus, as they had themselves conquered some parts of India, like Dionysus, like Alexander. These conquests are celebrated in a more mundane fashion by a Hephthalite bowl found in control excavations, a very rare case. It was part of a small hoard of precious silverware buried in a house at Chiliek, 30 kilometers north of Samarkand, sometime in the early 7th century. According to the type of the Hephthalite ruler in the central medallion, the bowl dates from the late 5th century. Prudence Harper, because of the flower and decoration, Prudence Harper interprets him as a Hephthalite ruler celebrating the new year together with his ladies. In a conventional palatial setting reminiscent of the bowl with standing characters we have just seen before. But here the Indian local color is more manifest with the capitals formed by the bodies of two zebus, and especially the Bollywood type of the ladies. I rather think that the scene is purely secular. We have a Hephthalite prince proudly exhibiting his newly acquired Indian harem and showing his gallant dispositions by offering a flower. The girls dance, hold crowns such as offered in banquets, or primp while tending a mirror to another girl. So the atmosphere in the harem is peaceful. the next object I am going to discuss, brings us again to the Indian conquest of the Hephthalites and to the memory of Alexander. But the source of inspiration is markedly different from all the others. It was acquired in 1961 from an aristocratic family of Lhasa, where it had been kept from times immemorial. It is now in a private collection in Japan and exhibited in the Tokyo Oriental Museum. I shall be relatively brief on this subject, for Ankadan and I have published a detailed study in the Bulletin of the Asia Institute 2 years ago, and presented it in lectures podcasted on the web. The scene takes place near a pond where fish are swimming. The characters are distributed in a symbolic Indian landscape summarized by realistic depictions of the tree Boswellia serrata, the Indian frankincense tree. See, the flowers are similar, and we see also frankincense exudes from the tree on this bowl. Actually, two subaltern characters are Indian. A servant dressed in a dhoti, carrying an amphora on his shoulder. He has a solar tattoo on his shoulders. And a drum player with ape-like features. There are, for the shape of the drum and the face of the kind of macaque face of this man, there are analogies in Indian art, the Bharut Stupa, and also on Sogdian metalware with a Stroganoff bowl. It's the same kind of half human, half ape playing on a drum. With his music and the bearing of his feet, he is trying to repel a snake attacking nestlings which are hatched or fed by their mother. So the same attack is repeated on all trees. See the snake. Can we see the snake here? Well, the nestlings. The snake is often shown crawling. Not very characteristic here, but we see it with the other ones. Well, the main character. Here you can see the snake, the nestlings. They are always in danger. The main character shown in two variants, one of which is repeated once, is nude, except for a cloak or a scarf. Both attributes indicating a royal status. His facial features are those of Alexander, including the anastole, the tuft of hair, the strands of hair on the forehead. See analogies here, the Begram Alexander, and terracottas from Samarkand depicting Alexander. You see, the anastole here, absolutely typical of Alexander. Actually, the source is in two episodes of the Alexander romance, both taking place in India or in some extremities of the world. Alexander plucking frankincense in a grove in the temple of the sun and moon, and Alexander approaching the fountain of life. The snakes guarding the grove of the temple are mentioned in the Greek version of the romance, while the nestlings symbolize the cycle of life associated with paradise. But what is unique here is that this bowl illustrates neither the Greek nor the Iranian versions of the myth, but the Jewish version, attested by the Talmud of Babylon and by a medieval Hebrew text called Sefer Alexandrus Mogdon. Only there does Alexander actually reach the source and drinks from it, and only there does he get circumcised. It's unquestionable, in order to be admitted to the Garden of Eden. The circumcision is clearly visible on both figures of Alexander. This repeated nude Alexander standing on both sides of the tree inhabited by a snake and from which he plucks frankincense is, of course, an allusion to the Jewish and Christian representations of the Garden of Eden. Here. And the image of the Zoroastrian paradise have also some things in common. It comes out, it grows from a pond, and with birds, this, all that. But the best analogies are, of course, the representation of the Garden of Eden, the nudity of the couple, Eve plucking the apple, and the snake. So it's clear the atmosphere is Jewish or Christian. The obvious conclusion is that this object was commissioned by a community of rich Jews, not very orthopractic, as they had no reluctance to depict the human figure. But there are other examples at that time among Hellenized Jews at Dura Europos and Palestine. The presence of numerous Jewish communities in Bactria and Sogdiana has been mentioned yesterday in my first lecture. But why did Bactrian Jews choose this particular subject? Alexander was remembered in the Jewish tradition as a just who had protected the Jewish people and had recognized the superiority of the God of Israel. More specifically, the Jewish subjects of the Hephtalites might have wished to flatter their masters, who, like Alexander, were conquerors of India. Be it as it may, this bowl is the only specimen which we can safely ascribe to a specific community. Besides the Jewish component, this illustration of the Alexander romance brings us to the theme of the models taken from Greco-Roman literature, which can be recognized on some Bactrian bowls and two ewers. Here I shall limit the presentation of this repertoire to one object, certainly the most remarkable, and for which our results are already accessible in an article in French, in Journal Asiatique, and in podcasts. It is the bowl found in Kustanai, Kazakhstan, in the early 20th century, kept at the Hermitage. And since Weizmann interpreted it as a patchwork of scenes from various tragedies of Euripides, no less than 4 tragedies. In reality, it illustrates just one story, and mainly from one work, Oedipus the King by Sophocles, with some iconographic adaptations which seem to betray an Indian intermediary in the transmission. This summarizes our conclusion, but I'll come to the details. The first scene shows the baby Oedipus with a 1 foot raised because he is attached to the tree. He has been abandoned by shepherds on Mount Cithaeron, where he is guarded by Tyche, the goddess of fortune. But here Tyche, the Greek Tyche, has been adapted to her Bactrian and Indian transpositions as Ardwarsh, Ardoksho, or Sri Lakshmi. This is the closest analogy are on these early Gupta coins, exactly the same pose of the feet and the same general outlook. The second scene is the parricide, Oedipus killing his father. Well, Oedipus, as you see, stands over the foot of the servant of his father who conducts the chariot. He doesn't want to let him come first on the way. He's a driver's quarrel. And of course, and then he will kill the old man, not knowing that this old man is his father. And he kills him with his traveler's stick. Jocasta, the widow, and you see the scenes are telescoped. Jocasta, the widow, pours a libation on what I suppose to be her husband's grave. But her glance introduces her to the consolation she is going to receive in the next scene. She is marrying, the young widow marries a younger man whom she does not know is both her husband's murderer and her own son. Here, the matrimonial chamber symbolized. Oedipus is nude, but he's presenting a flower, like the Hephthalite ruler we have just seen with his Indian harem, and here is Jocasta. In the last scene, the shepherd, who has just told the true story, puts his hand on Jocasta's head, a symbol, a Greco-Roman symbol of curse. And Jocasta has a scarf wrapped around her neck because she's going to hang herself. Jocasta's brother Creon, who is now assuming the power, bids her farewell. We know from the play that he is the one who organizes the funeral. And the blind Oedipus here curses Apollo, who has been responsible for his tragic life. Here, he shows with his wrist, he shows the sun, who is Apollo. It's a long discourse here. The central medallion shows the servant of Laius telling Jocasta the story of her husband's murder, but lying. He has already understood that the murderer is Oedipus, whom Jocasta has just married, but he doesn't tell it. And he escapes from the city because he has understood that the murderer is a man now on the throne and in Jocasta's bed. Some details are closer to Sophocles' text than any Roman illustration of the story. For example, Oedipus holds the alpenstock, the stick with an iron bowl at the end, which is actually the murder weapon, as Oedipus himself tells in his narration of the episode. But in Greco-Roman art, it's always a sword. So the Bactrian artist is closer to Sophocles than the Roman artist. At the end of the story, Oedipus is grasping a tree on Mount Ciceron, because we are back to the beginning of the story. And actually, he is begging Creon to be allowed to end his life where it had begun. Now let me dwell on the hills, this Ciceron, which was my destiny, the place my parents made my living grave. I'll die by those who wished my death. I know this well. No illness. It's exactly, and this episode is never illustrated in any Greco-Roman work. One significant adaptation is the Indian physical type and dress of Jocasta. Another adaptation, the most striking, is the erotic and seemingly positive atmosphere of her union with Oedipus. an episode which is never depicted in Greco-Roman art and avoided by Sophocles, except in retrospect allusions. In this inversion of values, we recognize the impact of the Hredoda, the Zoroastrian incestuous marriage, praised in religious literature as a highly meritorious action, and actually attested as a living practice among the Zoroastrians of Sogdiana by reliable foreign witnesses over a long period. Quintus Curtius, at the time of Alexander's expedition, then the Chinese chronicle Sui Shu, about Bukhara in the early 7th century, and as late as 726 by the Korean pilgrim Hui Chao, about Sogdians in general. So, for the people who commissioned this vase, marrying one's mother was no problem. Assuming such a cultural context, we can probably identify the sponsors of this work as local Bactrian or Sogdian Zoroastrians of the 5th century, rather than the ruling Huns, who were probably not Zoroastrians, or the Jews we have detected behind other works. This is the only case where we can be sure the owners were Zoroastrians. Nobody else would have depicted the incestuous marriage that way. In the case of this bowl, it is quite difficult to imagine an alternative to text transmission in one form or the other. Well, which form? Prompts for illustrated scrolls, an adaptation originally composed in India, where the theatrical genre flourished. The existence of this bowl might give a very good argument to those who propose an influence of the Greek theater at the origin of the Indian theater. It is something the Indologists have always rejected and are still rejecting. Paul Bernard tried to reintroduce the idea when we discovered the Greek theater at Aichanum. And actually at Aichanum we also have fragments of a Greek parchment, possibly from a play by Sophocles. Well, I don't know if the Indologists will change their position by facing this evidence. At the moment, we have no reaction from them after we published our discovery. At the moment, we have no Bactrian translation of any text from the Western literature, but at least we have two faithful Sogdian renderings of two fables by Aesopus. Perhaps we can expect future discoveries. Another possible way of transmission we can theoretically consider for other objects with classical subjects is the work of itinerant artists traveling with some specimens of their art. Admittedly, we have no literary nor epigraphic evidence for such Western artists in post-Greek Central Asia. The only one which had been supposed is Titus, author of the Miran painting, signed Tita. He has been dismissed. Tita is most probably an Indian name. Nevertheless, the international market of artistic creation might have been as open under the Hephtalites as it had been under the Greco-Bactrians. Obviously, after their victory over the Sasanians and the huge tribute they exacted for decades, the Hephtalites were among the best potential payers. They could appreciate images few people among them were really able to understand, but which provided them with prestigious cultural references. It is indeed possible that their elites chose the Hellenistic culture lato sensu as a counter-model for identification once they had rejected the authority of the Sasanians. The only possible alternative for them was India, but India for them was a space of conquest, and China, but China at that time had no cultural impact so far in the West. In this situation, Byzantium and the prestigious memory of Greece surviving locally were a tempting choice. Now, a digression, but I think, to conclude, but I think it is relevant to the subject. Similar explanation by migrant craftsmen can be contemplated for another set of exceptional metallic objects, namely a few daggers whose guards and shields were a polychrome cloisonné decoration. These daggers aroused much curiosity since the publication in the 1980s of the most spectacular specimen found in a non-royal warrior tomb at Gerimro in southern Korea, dating from shortly after 525, so just during the Hephthalite period. When I first saw the photos, actually in Seoul Museum, I nearly thought that this object was originally from Ireland or from France under the Merovingians. This is Merovingian cloisonné work. Well, there are actually a few very close parallels, geographically dispersed. A tomb at Borovoye in northeast Kazakhstan, and two later paintings, one in Kushānshāh, which shows exactly the same weapon, and in Fondukistan, slightly later, near Bamiyan, where the decoration is transferred to a longsword. Typologically, these objects, obviously destined to the highest military elite, are at the junction of two series. For the shape of the weapon, so which I call the daggers with two pea-shaped lobes, the attestations stretch from the Hephthalites to northern China. They are indicated by the white circles. There are some images in Iran, but they are now considered as borrowings from the East. So really, this is the road. And in a well-argumented study, Etsuko Kageyama attributes the origin of this model to the Hephthalite Empire. For the cloisonné decoration, the diffusion followed a more northern road from the Black Sea to southern Siberia, shown here. These are the cloisonné. This is the cloisonné decoration. So, where did it meet? No object approaches the quality of workmanship demonstrated at Gerimro and Borovoye or in the Kushānshāh painting. My favorite scenario is a direct encounter of Hephthalite armorers and jewelers coming from Byzantium or trained in the Byzantine tradition. Well, they could have been attracted to the Hephthalites by such a man as Eustathius, a merchant from Apamea in Syria, who worked as a Byzantine agent at the Hephthalite court. The hypothesis of deported craftsmen can also be considered. The only direct encounter between the Hephthalite army and Byzantium occurred in northern Mesopotamia and Syria in Amida, Edessa, in 502-505, when a numerous Hephthalite contingent served in the Sasanian army of Kawad. When the armistice was concluded, the Byzantine emperor sent to Kawad a set of golden tableware through the Sasanian commander. It would not be illogical to suppose that, according to the habits, the Sasanians also picked up skilled craftsmen and that the Hephthalite commander took their share. Tentative as they are, such suppositions can perhaps provide us with a model to understand the equally surprising Byzantine workmanship on some Hephthalite luxury weapons and the spectacular influx of classical subjects in Hephthalite silverware. Thank you.